Good morning, everyone. My name is Eva Ribera. I'm project officer at the Trans-European Policy Studies Association. As you might know, TAPSA is a network of 47 member institutes and associate members located in 37 countries, and they all work in the field of European affairs. It's my great pleasure and honor to open today this woman-only panel to discuss EU-Russia relations and the war in Ukraine from the Portuguese perspective. And it is organized in cooperation with TAPSA Portuguese member, the Portuguese Institute of International Relations, IPRI. So Sonia Senica will be moderating today's discussion as well as contributing. She's a research fellow at IPRI Nova and a guest lecturer in several Portuguese universities, working on Russian foreign policies and post-Soviet space. She's also a CNN Portugal international politics commentator. So Sonia, thank you very much. The floor is yours to start.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you so much for this honor and invitation. It's really good to be here today to make this reflection with you all. So good morning, good afternoon to you all. I don't know from which part of the world you're seeing today, but thank you so much to attend the event. I would like to start, of course, by thanking TAPSA for this idea of hosting this event along with cooperation with IPRI Nova in Portugal. IPRI is, of course, an international relations institute in Portugal, really known and has made a really important contribution to the areas of the political science and international relations. It is a great honor for receive this invitation to join, of course, the authors of the soon-to-be published Russia and the Future of Europe, Views from the Capitals. And a special, of course, thank you to the IPRI's director, Professor Nuno Teixeira, whom from the beginning supported this webinar. And last but not least, to the IPRI Nova Research Fellow, Alice Cunha, who put us on contact for this project. And also a special thank you to, of course, both Diana and Elena for accepting to share their thoughts and reflections today here with us. So please let me make a brief presentation of them both. Diana is a research fellow at IPRI Nova, and her field of research, where she is well known, is mainly the United States of America, but also the ER theories, where she has lots of work published. She is also a frequent guest lecturer at Portuguese Academy, and Diana has a weekly column at a well-known Portuguese newspaper, Observador, and she is also a CNN Portuguese Portugal commentator of international politics. Helena is head of corporate communication at Grupo Bell, administrator at Global Media Group, and administrator at LUSA. Her field of research is Germany internal and external policy, where she is recognized as one of the top analysts in Portugal due to her field experience as an international correspondent. She is also a frequent guest lecturer at the Portuguese Academy and other events in Portuguese society. Helena is also a CNN Portugal commentator of international politics. So our webinar theme is going to be the EU-Russia relations and the war in Ukraine from the Lisbon perspective. So I'm going to try to focus mainly on the bilateral level of the analysis of Portugal-Russia relations with an overview throughout the years about the importance of Russia and what it really represents in the Portugal foreign policy agenda and domestically in terms of public opinion, and especially how the two agendas diverge or may converge. Elena will make a framework approach regarding the EU-Russia relations while focusing in the paradigmatic case of Germany approach towards Russia war in Ukraine, especially the new time and period of strategic confrontation. Finally, Diana will present us the major implications of this strategic confrontation impacts for Europe, and of course, the particular case of war in Ukraine and the new European security architecture and new world order regarding this transition of power, especially in the international system after this event. So, of course, she will also talk about the strategic confrontation with the West, namely the United States and NATO. last but not least, for now, I'm going to make a brief presentation of the book that served as a starting point for this event today. So the book series, The Future of Europe, Views from the Capital, is one of TEPS's flagship activities, edited by Michael Kidding, John Spolek, and Paul Smith. These collections of short chapters, published every year, analyze topical European issues from different national perspectives and help understand the future of European projects. The soon-to-be-published Russia and the Future of Europe, Views from the Capitals, sheds light on how member states and EU neighbors relate to Russia. 56 authors analyze the historical, financial, and political ties of 41 European countries, as well as the public perception of the national population vis-à-vis Russia. Each chapter builds on these factors to elucidate the country's position towards Russia and show the diverse relations that EU member states and neighbors have with Russia, spanning from tense and confrontational to more eased and friendly, highlighting the contrasts between the national states and the EU as a whole. Russia's invasion of Ukraine on 24 February 2022 will change the relations between the West and Putin's Russia for decades to come. No doubt that this blatant violation of international law and the incomprehensible human suffering of Ukrainian citizens will massively change the attitude of the countries analyzed in this book. So, having said that, we are going to start with my communication and presentation. So, Eva, I'll try to show you this presentation here. Are you all able? Can you see that? Is it good?
Yep.
Okay. So, going like this. Great. So regarding the major topic of the event today, which is EU-Russian relations and the war in Ukraine from a Lisbon perspective, I'm going to focus mainly on the Portugal-Russia relations from a friendly to a hostile zone. So 3 ideas are important to start on. First, I will try to make a brief historical background. Second, Portuguese approach towards this kind of unpredictable or predictability of Russia, Putin's Russia. And finally, I'm going to try to see the long path, the long road that paved the way between friendly to hostile country relation. So in terms of the brief historical background, we have to go back in centuries actually, until 1779, where the first treaty of friendship and cooperation was consecrated between the two empires, and mainly give importance and relevance to the feminine leadership of both two rulers, Mary first in Portugal, our queen, and of course, Catherine the Great, empress in the empire, Russian Empire. They were trying to promote not only political and diplomatic ties, but of course, a special focusing on trade. Actually, Catherine was well known to very good appreciate not only the English tea, but also the Madeira wine and Porto wine in her court. So secondly, I would like to pass quickly to the cuts of diplomatic ties from 1917, when we had, of course, the Russian Revolution, to 1975, when we had in Portugal the Carnation Revolution that ended Salazar's and the dictatorship in Portugal with Marcelo Caetano. Of course, this was a long period and difficult one for both countries, but I would like to focus on the period that after 1986, the new ambassador reopened the diplomatic mission in Moscow. It was Mario Neves. So it's really a great period to study and talk about perhaps another time. Thirdly, I would like to focus on the good bilateral political relations between this new Portugal, this new democratic Portugal that was straightening a path towards not only liberal democracy, European path, but also an economy of market. In the meanwhile, of course, we know that the 90s with the Yeltsin presidents, they were really difficult for Russia because it was, of course, a period of transition And they were trying also to set and pave the way to be more close to the Western kind of mode, meaning economically and politically, but they were not well succeed, as we know. So afterwards, in 2000, we had beginning of what will be the Russian leadership of Vladimir Putin. Putin has been in power for 22 years, even that we know that from 2008 until 2012, he was, served as prime minister, and then he came back again for a presidential mandate until now. Of course, I would like to focus mainly that regarding Portugal, our path was permanent. I'm going to talk about it later, but now I would like to say that differently to Portugal, Russia is paving the way, or is coming to be a more autocratic regime internally and a more assertive power externally, as we know now, also militarized. So this kind of sovereign democracy of Russia, which is a kind of term used by the Russian narrative in the Kremlin after Surkov started the concept, means that for the one hand, we have an internal strong leadership of the Russian president. Of course, on the other side, we have the formulation in terms and decisions process in terms of foreign policy always being fundamentally internally and justified with an external threat, whether it is the enlargement of NATO, the enlargement of EU, or even only the United States itself. So finally, we are going to need to talk about, of course, the major shift, the major change that happened with the invasion of Ukraine. And I would like to state that this is, of course, an unprovoked, illegal, and brutal war. From this time onwards, we have, of course, a big change, not only in a security, European security environment, also in the international order, and of course, namely with the relation between Portugal and Russia. So in terms of Portuguese foreign policy, the trends and dimensions, they are permanent, which means that since the democratization of Portugal after the Carnation Revolution, we have, of course, three major important and relevant lines and trends. And they are, of course, the Atlantic dimension, because due not only to the Atlantic geographically, but also the close relations with the United States and, of course, NATO. It has been, and it's been now, a most important and relevant dimension of our foreign policy. Then, of course, we have the EU membership. So the European dimension from 1986, which has been also a relevant and most important in terms of modernization of the country, and of course, in also alignment of our internal agenda politically with our partners in Europe. Finally, we cannot forget the importance and relevance of Lusophony, Portuguese language, and the connections of cultural ties with former colonies, and of course, the Lusophony space. I'm thinking about CPLP, Brazil, all the countries that speak Portuguese in Africa, and of course, not forgetting also Timor-Leste. Finally, in the last decade, we are seeing that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is devoting a very relevant and importance to the Portuguese diaspora, considered itself an important dimension of of Portuguese foreign policy. So that's why we have now our 10th of June National Day, which is the Portuguese Camões, which is a well-known author of our literature, and of course, the Portuguese Diaspora Day. So as you can see, Russia is clearly not on the agenda. And here I would like to stress that, of course, this moment of war is really different also for Portugal. But until now, of course, we are thinking about the difference between us and some countries that are neighbors with Russia. I'm thinking about Finland, the Baltics. So the sensibilities And the perception of the Russian threat until now was, of course, very different. And that kind of special feature was also materialized on these kind of trends and dimensions. We need to think about also on the dimensions of Putin's Russia foreign policy to understand how we can be so different or where we can converge. Of course, now we are, I remember, in the stage of strategic confrontation. So there's a lot of tension and hostility in the air from both sides. Even though we can point out mainly 4 important and relevant dimensions from my point of view, which are, of course, the foundations for this now more militarized external action of Russia in especially Ukraine. So Russia has been advocating from the beginning in all the concepts of foreign policy, the importance of being recognized as a great power with an area of influence. And I can remember the example of the meeting, the first one, when the president of the United States, Joe Biden, met with President Putin in Geneva, and when he said that, of course, Russia was indeed a great power. Afterwards, I would like to focus on the importance of this advocating of multipolar world that we are now listening, especially from the official narrative. But this was always a trend consecrated in all the major documents and speeches of the last years. Of course, there are also the famous red lines from Moscow and the Kremlin, which are, of course, the regime stability and the prevention of enlargement of Western organization in the post-Soviet space, namely, of course, not only the EU, but also NATO. Finally, an important and relevant trend and line of Russian foreign policy that is also used in the case of the invasion of Ukraine, which is the protection of the Ruski Mir, the Russian wolf, the speaking language of Russia that, you know, it's really hard to understand this kind of trend of neo-imperialism of Russia today, but they are trying to justify that also with the end of the Soviet Union, and of course, the people that speak and feel close to Moscow, even though they sat and stayed beyond their frontiers. So Portugal approach towards this new strategy of Russia. Of course, we had prior to this invasion a more friendly bilateral relations. We are not on the top of the agenda of each country, but of course, there was always a good bilateral relations, diplomatic ties, in trying to pave the way to some kind of bilateral trade. Of course, due to these impacts of the war in Ukraine, Portugal has, of course, aligned with the Western partners, namely not only in condemning this action, this aggression of Russia, but also going and respecting the dual approach towards also Ukraine and Russia, which is helping Ukraine with military and humanitarian assistance, political and diplomatic way also, but at the same time trying to condemn the aggression of Russia in especially the United Nations, and of course implementing the economic sanctions. Due to this dual approach and strategic one, there is a clear marked position in terms of political government on Portugal, which has the support of most all the Portuguese parties. I have to say this, and especially all the Portuguese political parties in Portugal, except, I have to point it out, the Communist Party. It's really difficult for the Communist Party to not try to condemn the position of the other political parties in Portugal that condemned finally the Russian aggression in Ukraine, even though they tried to use some kind of narrative different to the Kremlin. So two good examples of Russia is on the Portuguese internal agenda. was namely due to the Navalny's factor in 2021 in January, when after the poisoning and after he recovered in Germany, he bravely went back to Moscow and was, of course, detained. So that arose a lot of riots all over the world in support of Navalny's liberation, and of course also here in Portugal and mainly in Lisbon. So in Lisbon, we had the called Medina Gate, where the mayor of the capital had to justify and apologize why the protesters' data and personal information were given to the Russian embassy and therefore to the Kremlin and Moscow. The other thing that I would like to point it out was a new example that arose a lot of condemnation and indignation, not only in the National Assembly in Portugal, but always in the government and finally in public opinion, which was recently after the invasion of Ukraine. We, of course, received some, in alignment with the other partners of the West, received some Ukrainian refugees. And in the case of particularly Setúbal, which is close here to the capital, Lisbon, they were sent there and they were received by Russian staff, where they collected the data, personal data of the refugees, not only of the person itself, but always the connection in Ukraine, family ties, profession, and so on. So that gave a lot of debates in social and political Portuguese society. And of course, there was a clear condemnation of the subject here, because Portugal has been a country when it protects and defends values such as democracy, freedom, and liberty. Final remarks. The invasion of Ukraine, of course, gave the way to a destabilization of what we had known so far regarding the European security, the international order, and as Putin put it the other day, nothing is forever, and according to him, the unipolar order ended. Of course, contrary to the Kremlin's intention, we have now more NATO. And today is the third and final day of the NATO summit in Madrid, when we had not only a new strategic concept, a really relevant, where Russia is identified as the major direct threat, but also it's opened the door to Finland and Sweden that were so until now, as you know, I can only remember the term in Portuguese, neutral, I'm sorry. So afterwards, we have also in the European project, Ukraine now starting the membership session. And of course, we have all this security dimension being paving the way for a new decisions in terms of political external agendas of all countries of the enlarged West. This is, of course, a multi-level crisis. Political one, military one, humanitarian, food crisis, energy crisis. So the waves of impact, they are huge, and we really need to be prepared for the future. Finally, I would like to say that in this strategic confrontation cycle, Portugal clearly aligns with Western patterns against Russian militarized foreign policy. This is important to reiterate. We are a democratic country where values such as sovereignty of states, liberty of opinion, citizens' rights, they need and they are respected. So thank you very much. Now I'm going to give the floor to Helena. The floor is yours. Thank you. We cannot listen. You need to put the mic.
Sorry, I was in mute. I was saying good morning or good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here to share the stage with Sonia, with Diane, and with all of you. I will try to to speak just for 10 minutes, and I will start to ask if there's whether a major change in Germany's policy towards Russia has in fact taken place, and my question or my provocation is a shift politic to frost in German means ice. German relationship with Russia is widely considered to be of fundamental importance to European security and the old constitution of the West since the Second World War, whereas some tend to judge Germany's reliability as a partner to the United States in its so-called Westbindung in general against its dealings with Russia. Others focus on Germany's leadership of European foreign policy, while still others see the Russian-German relationship as an overall barometer of conflict and cooperation in Europe. How Germany chooses to approach Russia and how it deals with the war in Ukraine in particular are questions that lie at the crux of several possible visions for a future European order. After the end of the Second World War, a large group of Germans believe if there is stability in country today is because hundreds of thousands of soldiers from the Soviet Union left the German territory without firing a single shot. Many in Germany believe that the country owes a certain depth of gratitude to the Kremlin in terms of initiating economic and political partnerships with Russia. There's always the history, and we have to understand this relationship also lying behind this history. Ostpolitik is a term that was coined to describe the West Germany's cooperative approach to the Soviet Union and other Warsaw Pact countries, and it was initiated by Chancellor Willy Brandt in 1969. As formulated by Brandt political secretary Egon Bahr, the key idea of the new Western policy was to achieve positive change through reapproachment, the Wandel durch Annäherung. In the Cold War context, the primary example of the Ostpolitik was West Germany's willingness to engage with the Soviet Union through energy cooperation, including gas supply, but also pipeline and nuclear projects. Yet, at the same time, West Germany participated in Western sanctioned regime concerning the technology transfer to the Soviet Union and its allies, and accepted the deployment of American nuclear missiles on its soil as a response to comparable Soviet nuclear armaments. The key principles of Ostpolitik seem to remain intact when Angela Merkel of the Christian Democrats became the federal chancellor in 2005. There were many who believed that Merkel's relationship with Moscow was going to be less friendly, given her background in the dissident movement of the former German Democratic Republic. However, while Merkel did not form a close personal relationship with President Putin, no major changes in Germany's policy towards Russia followed. Germany remains Russia's key partner in Europe, and a modernization partnership designed to intensify cooperation in various fields was formed when Dmitry Medvedev became president of Russia. The Russian-German terms seemed as stable as ever until February 2022. Chancellor Scholz surprised the world and his own country when he responded to Russian invasion of Ukraine with a 100 billion euro plan to arm Germany, to send weapons to Ukraine, and to end Germany's deep dependence on Russian energy. The SPD and the former German politicians and diplomats have also been recriminated for making historical mistakes in their dealings with Russia. It was Germany's biggest foreign policy shift since the Cold War, what Mr. Scholz calls a Zeitenwende, an epochal change that won applause for his leadership home and abroad. But just a few weeks later, the applause was largely seized, even as image of atrocities emerged from Ukraine's invasion by President Putin of Russia Scholz has ruled out an immediate oil and gas embargo, saying it would be too costly. Zeitwende is real, but the country is the same. Germany is the same. Not everyone likes this. It's the statement of many analysts. The change that Mr. Scholz announced go far deeper than this commitment to spend 2% of gross domestic product in the military, around or circa 70 billion a year, compared with France's 41 billion per year. They go to the heart of Germany's post-war identity as a peaceful exporting nation, and to the heart of a business model that has enriched Germany and made it Europe's largest and most powerful economy. Now, Germans are being asked to rethink everything, their approach to doing business, their energy policy, to defend, and how to deal with Russia. They need a mindset change. They need to recognize this is about us, Europe, and that the power politics are back and Germany must play a role. A few weeks after Mr. Scholz spoke on the Bundestag, German celebrities made headlines with an appeal to the government against the rearmament and the 180 degrees change in German foreign policy that has so far been signed by 45,000 people. Green lawmakers have lobbied to spend only part of the 100 billion special fund on the military, citing other needs like human security and climate change. Labor unions and the industry bosses are warning of catastrophic damage to the economy and immediate recession if Russian gas stops flowing. As the chief executive of the German chemical giant BASF, Martin Brudermüller, put it, cheap Russian energy has been the basis of our energy and competitiveness. And it has, in fact, been the basis of the German economy. Even since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the German reunification, business as usual with Russia largely meant change through trade, the conviction that economic independence would alter authoritarian governments like Russia and China for the better and help keep the peace. Prosperity and democracy, the thinking went and go hand in hand. The link to Russia is particularly complicated by a long and complex history of hot and cold war, including guilt over the millions of Russians killed by the Nazis. They reinforce the belief that the security architecture in Europe had to include Russia and take account of Russian interests. Yet, now it's pretty clear in Germany, there can be no return to business as usual. No one really wants to go back to the old times of engagement with Russia. And we have to say that German policy towards Russia changed dramatically in the last weeks. And the primarily, or the politics that it was driven primarily by commercial interests have changed. What we are assisting, and that's my perspective, we are shifting from the classical Ostpolitik from Willy Brandt to a Frostpolitik, to a new era. We don't know what path we're going to go through, but there's definitely here a change. And I will just stop here and leave the floor to Diana.
Diana, please.
I'm so sorry. I was so focused on Elena's presentation and all the information she was giving to us that I was a little bit distracted. I'm so sorry. So I'm going to try to stick to my 10 minutes also. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to acknowledge what everyone already knows, and my colleagues already mentioned that the world changed enormously since February 24th, 2022, and it's not going to go back to where it was. As Elena said, and also Sonia in a certain way, we don't know yet everything. But we already know a few things. So what I'm going to do is to make three points three arguments. Two about what we already know and what we already can see, and one about we don't know yet. And in the end, I'm going to make a very, very brief comment on the Portuguese position towards everything that's going on, which I think is also important and part of what we are doing here today. So the topic of this conference is Europe-Russia relationship and how it changed. Well, I think we already understood how it changed, but my point here is it changed Europe along with the larger international system. So the change in European foreign policy and European countries' foreign policy cannot be detached by the change of the rest of the world. Look at this last week, which is an argument that I've been making, and I think it makes sense, and I would like to know your opinion, which is we had the European Council, and then the G7 summit, and then we are now having the NATO's summit. And in a little more than a week, we have three incremental and formidable changes. In what concerns the EU, the European Union, the Council of Europe, the states approved Ukraine and Moldova's status of candidate. This changes everything. How? Because it enlarges completely, not only the European Union and the prospects of the European Union being larger, but it enlarges already. It doesn't have to wait. This political action makes the borders of security of Europe completely different. From the day that Ukraine and Moldova were accepted as assessing countries, it was a declaration to Russia that the borders, the frontiers of security of Europe have enlarged towards Ukraine, towards the very heart of the borders with Russia. And that is a huge change. And in my perspective, the reason why there were so many European leaders very reticent about this change is not because the accession can take a lot of time because these countries are not prepared, but because they knew that this step would lead to a real change of our borders of security. Then look at the G7, where there were several European countries and also the United States. The G7 was an extension in one way of Russia's, of the punishment and the way that the West is dealing with Russia, sanction-wise, diplomatic-wise. So there was no real innovation in that sense. But something else happened, something that we were already seeing happen, but increased and accelerated with the war in Ukraine, is the West, especially the United States, but including Europe also, as a provider of international common goods. This idea of international common goods is something that comes from the past, especially the 70s, where there was a sense that for the West to work, the United States had to provide a number of common goods that ranged from security, economic stability, free flow of products, everything that we needed to remain prosperous and strong. Now the idea of common goods has come a little too far. The United States and Europe cannot only provide that in their own space, they had to provide that to others. So we saw a huge agenda of things like rebuilding infrastructure in foreign countries, distributing vaccines against COVID-19, working together for peace and stability around the globe, working together to mitigate the food crisis, So all of a sudden, this war gave an opportunity for something that the United States was already willing to do, which was to provide common goods to the world. This is the democratic way of attracting countries to our kind of system instead of coercing them. And this, which was a marginal policy until Biden became president, and a semi-marginal policy when Biden became president, became a major policy when the war started. And when we started to see the consequences of the war, especially the problem of food crisis. So this is another major change where Europe actually is very, very involved. Third, look at NATO security concept. It was approved this morning, but we already had access to it yesterday. And what does the concept says? The concept says we have a major threat to Europe and a more diluted international threat to the world where NATO is inserted. The first one is obviously Russia, and the second is China. Why am I mentioning this? That might seem absolutely normal and something that everyone was expecting. Because in the previous concepts, Russia was marginal in the European concerns. It was not, I mean, it was also always there, and it always figured, there was always a statement about Russia and the possible threats that Russia could pose. But let me tell you something. 10 years ago, or 11, when we were discussing the strategic concept of 2010, I was in a meeting with two members of the Council of Wise Men that was created at the time to discuss with the European partners about the future of NATO. And that meeting was really about the United States and part of the allies in Western Europe, including Germany, to try to convince the more reticent members to alleviate the Russia threat from NATO strategic concept. So 10 years ago, we were trying to normalize our relationship with Russia, and now we are reinforcing our common alliance towards making dissuasion towards Russia. And this is a change that it's absolutely it's from one side to the other. 10 years ago, we want to have good relations with Russia, and the Obama administration that was behind this concept really believed that that was possible. Now we are looking for ways of making NATO stronger and stronger and stronger in a way that it has to be the organization that contains Russia for coming further to the West, and that's major. That's major. And why did I mention China? Because I think China has a double function in this strategic concept. The first, it's somehow pleasing, I would say, that the United States, before the war, there was a major concern about consecrating China as a challenge or not in NATO strategic concept. Most Europeans didn't want to do it. The United States did want to do it because for them, China is the major concern in the long run. I think the fact that China figures in the concept is a kind of compromise between the United States and the European countries. But on the other hand, is an internationalization of NATO, an internationalization that is related to distribution of labor towards security. NATO is going to be responsible for the European security, and is going to be responsible, and this is very important, for the guarantees of security that Ukraine needs when the war ends. And probably Germany is going to have a very important role in this particular matter. Asia and the Indo-Pacific, with all its new alliances and the reinforcement of all the alliances between the United States and the countries over there, is going to be responsible for the containance of China. However, Japan and South Korea are observers in NATO, and the United Kingdom is very strongly tied to the Asian security. And this brings us to an end of a circle itself. So in 1 week, we will enlarge our security borders in Europe. We became distributors of common international goods, and we became, through NATO, the guarantor of security in Europe and Ukraine, tied to a larger international system where autocracies are our enemies. So this is a complete change in the world architecture. 2 more points, very, very fast. In this context, in my opinion, it doesn't matter who comes and who's going to be in the White House in 2024. NATO become an indispensable alliance for the United States. Second, there are things that we don't know already. First, what's going to happen when the peace agreement comes? What kind of relationship are we going to be able to have with Russia? What kind of Ukraine are we going to have? I have my calculations, but I'm not going to talk about it because it's not important. But what I believe is that we're going to have a very tense relationship with Russia for the decades to come. And that also corresponds, as Elena was saying, to a mindset that has to change, a mindset that makes countries like Portugal, and this is my last note regarding the Portuguese position in NATO, in the international system, and its position towards Ukraine. We still need in Portugal, from my point of view, a mindset change. We need in Portugal something that it's not happening yet, which is a communication of war. We need our governments to start to speak with people and explain to them, to the public opinion, that we're going to have to spend a lot more money in defense, that our economy is going to be a war economy in the years to come, and that our common effort is fundamental to assure our security. This is not at all an easy speech, because in Europe, in particular, in general, and in Portugal, which is the case I know best in that sense, in particular, we are very used to have Europe and the state taking care of us. We are not used to have to be us to sacrifice something to the state and to the common good. And this is actually what we have to do next. And I'm very I'm expecting to see how the Portuguese population is going to react. And I attribute a somehow shy approach from the Portuguese government towards Ukraine. Sonia is right. We were always aligned with our partners, but we were always next to the more reticent. And my opinion for this to be happening is precisely that. We have 2 problems. We're very far away from Russia, so we don't feel the threat of Russia the same way as Poland or the Baltics or Romania, or so the threat, somehow the war is close because we feel close emotionally with Ukrainians, but the threat is far away. That's the first point. The second point is that we are going to need to make sacrifices. And Portugal went to an austerity policy that was very, very tough. And it's really hard to explain to our public opinion that our mindset needs to change and sacrifices need to be made. And so we are somehow, in terms of politics, delaying it. My opinion is that we have to move forward as soon as possible because the consequences are already here and are going to be worse very, very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to both Elena and Diana. Wonderful reflections for us to pave the way for some Q&A. But I would like to, if I may, to wrap it up, because it was really good to understand the importance and relevance of Elena's reflection and contribution to give us a different agenda, political one, towards Russia regarding Portugal, and of course an important and relevant country such as Germany. For instance, I'm thinking about the access in the European project, and of course Diana's contribution, especially in this debate nowadays in every society, that is the concern or the dichotomy between justice or peace. Whether we can support Ukrainians, will help and sustain our policy in our governments to go further, or we need to be some kind of selfish way path and think about ourselves. So that's a really interesting thing. And of course, I didn't talk in my presentation, and Diana made it very clear, and it's wonderful she did it, because we have still a problem in Portugal society regarding the war. There are still a generation of our uncles and fathers that went to war in the colonies. So that's a different kind of subject to be approached. So I guess this time the militarization or the expenditure of Portuguese budget in terms of the militaries keeping up with the commitments in NATO and helping more with weapons Ukraine, it's kind of hard to be further along because it's an internal problem. It's sensitive and it's hard. We didn't make peace with that time of period in our history, I guess, perhaps in a couple of decades, but I guess it has to be with that, because in terms of public opinion in general, every Portuguese supports and condemns this aggression and supports Ukraine. I think the problem is between the support and what we have to do to maintain that support. And of course, this kind of a sensitive topic, which is the militarization and the concern regarding a larger army in Portugal because of the war in colonial time. So I think we have a couple of questions. Eva, in the chat, we can start perhaps. So I don't know if they can prefer me to read the questions, or they can openly made it here through the microphone, the audience, that I can read it. Is it better for me to read it?
Hi, yeah, thank you for the great presentations. I think you can maybe read it, except Pedro Constantino, if you want to speak and put your camera on, I'm happy to let you write that, just in case maybe, yeah, you can read. Thank you.
So I'm going to read this one. Okay. If the conflict remains localized between Russia and Ukraine, the consequences will be mainly economic. If the conflict escalates and leaves a localized field for a confrontation with NATO, Portugal will be inside the conflict, with the direct consequences arising from the Atlantic Alliance. In this perspective, sovereignty issues will have to be re-evaluated. As you know, since the beginning of the 20th century, social expenditures have grown and sovereignty expenditures have declined. Will Portugal manage to increase sovereign expenditures, namely defense and security, without lowering its social protection? Thank you. Well, I guess it was the topic we were trying to approach regarding the latest reflections of Diana. So I think I made it clear my point of view, and I will give straight the floor to both Elena and Diana. Perhaps Elena, she would like to start, please.
Sorry, I was muted. Well, I think we have to have in mind that this is a dilemma. You have then security and defense, and you have the other social costs. But we are in a very special moment of history and very special circumstances. And sometimes when you have limited resources, they're always limited, you have then to choose where you want to then to invest. And defense and security are investments. They are not wasting money. They are investments in our well-being, in our security, in our future. So this debate or this dilemma, it will be present, but I do agree with Diana when she was saying we need to do a war pedagogy. We have to explain our public opinions why we are doing this and to prepare them for this sacrifice. We're living in a well-being societies, even in Portugal. Portugal tends to forget it's a well-being society because almost every country in the European Union are well-being societies, some exceptions, but Portugal is a well-being society, and it's not used to this how will I formulate it, to this solidarity, but a very concrete solidarity that requires from us citizens some personal sacrifices. So the dilemma will be here, but I think we need to realize what we have in front of us, what future do we want for us, and we are dealing with an autocracy versus democracies, and then that's what's on the table, and that's the choice that we have, the choice burden that we have to make.
Thank you, Elena. And a tricky question, if I may, for you, in a quick answer. You think it will be more difficult for the German public to accept on the cold winter these costs of supporting Ukraine regarding Portugal way of?
I don't think so. I think the problem in Germany, I've been saying this for the last weeks, is industry and the economy. It's not the consumer or the final consumer, because they have to turn a little bit then the gas, and they don't have the houses so hot as usual. But the Germans have a very good construction. The house have everything, so the final consumer will be fine with that. The problem and the fears are that there's a recession, economic recession, because the industry in Germany depends on the energy and Russian energy supplies, and that's the major problem, and that's the major discussion in Germany. And you have then the industry pressing the government and to be careful with the decisions that the government is making. But I think now it becomes very clear that they have to go through this path.
Okay, thank you so much. I will give the floor to Diana, trying to also make a tricky question, which is after trying to answer this question, of course, of Pedro Constantino. But if you were in the position of the government, Diana, which would be your approach regarding this dilemma? How would you explain to the public this question and relevant position of Portugal? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that your question goes very well with Pedro's question. And I was reading it and I was thinking, well, this is not if we get into the war, if there is a generalized war in NATO. What we have to work for is two things. First, try not to have a generalized war, which is not something that is off the table, despite the fact that I think that leaders have been very careful not to escalate in both sides, both Russian and transatlantic. But what I think is exactly the pedagogy that we have to make is exactly that we don't have to raise our expenditures in defense when we get in a war. We have to do it in order to avoid a war. What I was trying to say during my presentation is that NATO has a double role at this point. It's the support to Ukraine, that it might cost us a lot of money for a while until the war ends. And with it comes the guarantees of security for Ukraine after the war, because Russia probably is not going to accept, and no one's going to make Russia accept, that Ukraine becomes a NATO member anytime soon, and we have to deal with this. But the other role that NATO has, which for me is probably the most important one, because this one is the one that I just mentioned, is something that we are already there and we can't escape. The second one is to make sure that Russia doesn't have the temptation to come to Europe. And that is what we call dissuasion. And that takes a lot of money, because the only way that we can really dissuade Russia to attack Europe or a NATO member or any other country for that matter, because that's what we are looking at, is to show that we have military capabilities and a strong military alliance that will strike back if Russia tries. That's what dissuasion is all about. You don't come into a country, because you know that if you come into a country, if you invade a country, you're going to pay a very high price. And that's what we have to show Russia, independently of anything. And hopefully there is not going to be an escalation of the war towards Europe, but we do have to make sure that there is no escalation now, and there is no escalation in the future. It's not something that we can actually, okay, this is over, Russia learned its lesson, and it's not going to do this again. That's not true. We don't know that. The only way to assure that is to make, to have a strong dissuasion force towards Russia. The provocative question of Sonia. If I was a decision maker at this time, I would start right away to make, to explain, to do this war communication that I've been talking about, because I think we can overcome an economic problem with time. We cannot overcome a security problem. I do understand, I really do, that this is really hard to explain to people. We're going to have to live worse, because we have to avoid to have war in our territory. But this is exactly what it is, and there's no way around it. So if I had to make a decision, this would be the decision that I would make, although I truly understand the difficulties of it.
Thank you so much for that wonderful reflection of both of you. I think we have here someone that wants to share with us and make a question.
Yes, Maria Isabel Neto Fernandez, you have the floor. I see your hand is raised. Yes.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to speakers. Recently, President Putin addressed a speech in which he appeared to be laying territorial claims on Estonia. Weakening the aggressor's capabilities is a sensible self-defense policy. USA looks to China, probably the new hegemon in the future. In your opinions, are the steps taken with the strategic compass sufficient from the military point of view for the European Union? For example, establishing a strong EU rapid development capacity of up to 5,000 troops? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your questions, because they are one, but a lot of the mention of them. I don't know if Diana would like to start, then we can pass through on to us, and me, of course. Thank you.
I do really think that the debate today is not about the European Union and the European Union becoming or having an army or an autonomous army. I think that debate is over for the moment. Europe realized that by itself it cannot address the problem as it is. So the compass opens the room for Europe to have its own armies one day, but it's not something that's going to happen right now in any possible way. I think everything at this point points out to an enlargement and a reinforcement of NATO's European pillar. So I think that's what we're going to see mostly. I do understand that people, because the member states of NATO and EU are not the same, that's a question that comes very often. However, I don't think we have the possibilities right now to duplicate military forces and military equipment. The time urges. This is another thing that we haven't talked about, but it takes time to build even the European pillar of NATO, although there are many things that are already in place. But we need strong armies, and we need people trained, and we need technology, and we need to develop a number of technological issues, and that takes time. So we cannot afford to do it twice.
Thank you, Diana. Actually, I think that Elena just perhaps felt the connection, but well, I will try to give my opinion and my reflection with you also. I agree with Diana fully. I think that, first of all, one of the implications that we saw with this war in Ukraine is, of course, the relevance and revitalization of NATO, not only from the bonds that connect United States with European partners, but of course, the capacity of security terms regarding European security field. So it's going to be NATO and the relevance of NATO in that part. I don't think the debate is quite well at the first stage of the agenda now, because it was not previously. Of course, the strategic compass is better and it's different. There's some changes, and they may be different in the next decade. But for now, they are not enough. And clearly, we need the United States and NATO to defend the European project. So I guess it's a fact. That's why the commitment, political one, and the leadership, they are always and at all time focusing only on NATO. And as Diana said, G7, the memberships of the next enlargement of the European Union. So the focus is trying to, as Diana said, a circle that can join all the different features of the Western strategic approach towards Russia, which will be, as we know, different to normalize relations with, because it's an aggressive authoritarian regime. I guess I will pass straight forward to the question we have here from Paulo Freire de Bonneral, participating from Ethiopia. Thank you so much for the excellent presentations and arguments. I had frequent exchanges in the recent past, last 15 to 10 years with some high-ranked Russian officials, always concerning trade and investment in third-party countries. My impression was that the suspicious mistrust and contempt towards Western countries were always present. Apart from a young urban elite, these sentiments are shared by most of the Russian average people, especially in the areas apart from Moscow and St. Petersburg. I understand the idea in Joe Biden's strategy, idea that Russia will be a menace for the next 10 years or so, and China will always be this everlasting menace to our common Western values and interests. I do not agree with that assumption. I believe that Russia and Central Asia countries will always be a menace to those Western interests and values, especially defeated in the present conflict. And this jumped a lot. Give me a second. Diana Solar, please comment. Thank you. So I guess it's to you straight. Diana, thank you.
I think it's to everyone. Hola, Paulo.
You can start.
Okay. Well, I think the threats that come from Russia and that come from China are completely different. The problem with Russia, it's here, it's straightforward. We are talking about a revisionist power that for the first time since World War II in our territories, managed to use the force, decided to use the force to change borders. And that is something that we cannot tolerate in any possible way, not only because the public opinion is all behind Putin in this invader, but because you just can't. It's going to subvert completely the way we think about foreign policy, international relations, and the way we conceive the world and we think a peaceful world should look like. I've been saying that peace means different things in China, Russia, Portugal, NATO, United States, everything. So this goes to my approach to China. I think China is not aggressive, although I'm not a specialist in China. China is not aggressive the way Russia is. But it doesn't mean that China doesn't have a plan to change the world according to its will, to its civilization, to its way of thinking. It's a plan that started precisely by economically relate to third countries, and actually, and Portugal is a good example of this, buy and acquire assets that are essential for our country's functioning, including banking, insurance, energy, which is something that we've been talking about a lot when it concerns Russia. But we should not forget that part of our energy, or a big part of our energy, is owned by China. So at this point, if we had any doubts of how economic interdependency can work against small countries, we now know. So yes, from my perspective, China is a long-term threat, not only because it owns assets of a very large number of small countries that it can control over those assets, but also because China has a view of the world where China is the only superpower and the rest of the world are second-run countries that have to abide to China's rules. And I don't think I would like to live in a world where I'm treated like a vassal or a second-rank citizen of the world because I owe my existence to China. So I think this might seem a little fuzzy at this moment and impossible to imagine. And sometimes it's hard to imagine and to consider a threat something we cannot imagine. But China has very, 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 very strong ambitions in the international system, and it's actually capable of changing our lives. And so, although China is a much ratified threat at this moment, and something we don't think about very often, yes, I think it looms in the air, the possibility that China can have, maybe not in our lifetimes, but in the future. I think it's a real important threat. And more than that, I think Portugal is one of those fragile countries towards China. China acquired a lot of assets that we cannot take back. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Wonderful reflection. Before I pass the floor to Elena to see if she wants to contribute also with this reflection, I'm just going to allow to say that Russia tries to conquer land, while from my point of view, China gains in conquering markets and investments. And if we look abroad, because you're talking, Paulo, from Ethiopia, if you're looking at the Chinese strategy in the African continent, you can really see this approach also. And even Russia there tries to compete with that approach, which is very interesting. The economic approach, infrastructure approach. That's why Diana was talking here about this new stage of the administration of Biden with all the mechanisms it has mainly in G7, with this new organization of a club of sending in partage of goods to other parts of the world, namely Africa, and the countries that are vulnerable, of course, to this food and energy crisis. So there are trends, of course, that Russia is still and persists to be and wants to be a competitor in a big power in its international system. But I agree with Diana. The only power that can compete strongly and affirmatively, if it wants, with the United States, it's China. So, Elena, the floor is yours. If you want to, the mic is off. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm doing this through my my telephone, and sometimes it's not easy.
Okay.
I do agree with Diane and with you, Sonia, as well. I think China is a very important threat. It's different from Russia, but has the same ambitions. And I think it was very important that the NATO leaders voiced their concern about the threat that China poses to the world, and it made it very clear for the first time. And just from a military point of view, China has the capability of project forces to all the world. As a military power, they are really almost a superpower, and that's something that we have then to think and to have to bear in mind. They are even stronger than Russia. From a military point of view, of course, they tend to use trade as a weapon. They weaponize trade, all this strategy for one belt, one road, through trades, buying then important assets in energy, then strategical sectors. And I do agree, and it's very risky for Portugal because we have then some strategic companies in the hands of the Chinese and the Chinese government, and that's not very confident. We are really Portugal is a fragile state from that point of view. And I think what I would also like to underline now, today, China is not an adversary in the classical sense, but does represent serious challenges, and we have to prepare ourselves for this challenge. I don't know, I don't have the answers, then they are very difficult, but we do have then to start thinking how we are going to deal with this. The systemic rival is the wording that we can find in the strategic concept from NATO, and we have then to make very serious thoughts about China and how we're going to deal with this very aggressive autocracy that controls its citizens through biometric data, that has methods that are from one perspective very sophisticated, and from the other perspective very medieval. So China is a very complicated actor. That's what I just wanted to add to your excellent analysis.
Thank you so much. So I guess we have no more question, which means that we made it. It was a success. Everybody agreed with our arguments. No one wants to contest us. So if you allow me, before I give the floor to you all to say the final words, thank you so much for all of your support, Eva and Tepsa, of course. I will try one more time to have this kind of events with you because it was really wonderful. And of course, thank you so much, Diana and Elena. You were always good friends and wonderful analysts and important contributions. It's always a pleasure to come and give the floor to you and listen to you. Like I'm always learning with your contribution every day, which is amazing. And of course, thanks to all of the audience that is somewhere here in the Cybernet cosmos and we don't see them, but thank you so much. You're very kind. So perhaps Elena, you would like to start, and then we'll pass, because you're in my screen as the big one. You're still there. So do you want to start to say the final word? Thank you.
Just two words. I would like first to thank for this invitation. I think this format, webinars, is always a very interesting format because we have interaction, we have presentation, and we can answer directly to questions. The themes were then super important. I've learned a lot. I always learn with you and with Diana, and it's an honor then to do this job and try to to go out of the academy and then try then to discuss, to debate, to think, to make thoughts about something that's going on in a very accelerated way. We are living history in a very, very accelerated way. It was an honor and a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elena. Diana, thank you too. Wonderful presentation also.
I'm going to confess something. Somehow, Sonia, Elena, and I have been an informal team that we not decided to be. We were just fortunately together at the same place at the same time. That's true. And we are a product of Russia war. Because although I did already knew Sonia, our areas of interest in mine are very distant, and I didn't know Elena at all. I just knew she existed, and she was a very good analyst. And I'm very thankful for the fact that I met these two ladies, and that we've been working together from different perspectives, but committed to the same sort of understanding of the world and willingness to explore what are the possibilities of helping out with whatever we know to make things better. So sometimes we're tough because these are tough times. But in the midst of tough times, there are always good things. And one of the good things that I have is that I met, again, that the war brought these two ladies to my life, and that we've been doing a lot of work together, and it's been really, really wonderful. Not only learning, but also teaming, which I also love. I'd like to thank everyone for being here with us, especially people from Portugal who put up with us almost every day. And I think it's really brave of you to be here at 9 a.m. Lisbon to listen to us all over again. So thank you so much for your patience. I'd like to say to Eva that she's the kindest host that we could have had, and that IPRI, to which I also belong, for many, many years, is very proud to be part of your network, and I hope we can work together in the next in the times to come. And thank you for everyone that made this possible, and for having me, because it's always an honor to be able to speak with people who are interested in the same issues as we are, especially if they are related to our common future and our common interests. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Diana. So, Eva, perhaps you can make the final comments, or
Yes.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to repeat pretty much the same. I want to say on behalf of TEPSA, thank you very much to all participants for joining us today, and also a special thank you to all the speakers, Dania, Sonia, Elena. Amazing contributions, very interesting insights, and we're grateful for the collaboration and for IPRI to be part of TEPSA's network. And yeah, I wish you all a great day, and see you soon, maybe at the next event.